Welcome to Hogrefe's webinar about the Early Sociocognitive Battery, the ESB. We're so excited to have you all join us today from the US and the UK. I'm Christina Kowalczyk, the Director of Assessment with Hogrefe Publishing Corporation. Our US home office is based in the Boston area, but I'm coming to you today from a very windy Chicago. I can see people are joining us from different locations. It looks like we have some people from the Northeast, from the UK, from the South. Great. We're very glad to have you here with us today. I can see that there are people joining us who were at the National Association of School Psychologists Conference that we attended earlier this month in New Orleans. It's nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us today. And an extra special thanks to those of you from the UK. We know it's later in the day for you, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'd also like to introduce you to our presenters today. Molly Ware, assessment consultant with more than 10 years experience as a practicing school psychologist, and Lisa Marquez, research associate with more than 15 years of experience as an early childhood educator. Lisa and Molly will be leading us through the webinar today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Your microphone and camera won't be on for this as an attendee, but if you have any point want to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature likely located at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end, but you're welcome to ask any along the way, and we may stop to read and answer some of them. Let's kick it off by handing it to Molly.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be speaking with you all about the ESB. As Christina said, I'm a school psychologist, and I practiced for more than 10 years and worked primarily with kids in preschool up to 6th grade. And I came to Hogrefe last July, and right away I jumped into the ESB project, which was really fun. I got to help the development team gather some of the standardization data. So I administered the ESB to several children, which was really neat and fun to do. So let's talk a little bit about what the webinar will cover. Today, we're going to do a quick overview of the ESB. We're going to discuss when and how to use the ESB in practice. We're going to talk about the benefits of using the ESB, including how it supports practitioners and the impact that early identification and targeted intervention can have on children. And we'll also tell you about some other projects and opportunities that Hogrefe is offering and answer any questions that you have about the ESB. I'd first like to tell you a bit about the origins of the ESB. The authors are from the United Kingdom and are pictured here. Dr. Penny Roy is a psychologist, and Dr. Shula Chayat is a psycholinguist, and Jennifer Warwick is a speech-language pathologist who joined Penny and Shula with the UK standardization of the ESB. The authors worked alongside the Hogrefe team to adapt the assessment from UK English to US English. The authors originally developed the ESB because they needed a way to systematically measure sociocognitive skills for a longitudinal study that they were conducting. So a little bit later on in the presentation, I'll talk more about the research that they conducted. So what is the ESB? The ESB is a really quick, standardized assessment. It typically takes about 15 minutes to administer. It evaluates early developing social communication skills. What's nice is that the child is not required to speak to participate in the assessment, so it's a great tool to use under many different circumstances if there's a barrier with language or with speaking. The ESB is standardized and normed for children ages 18 months up to 5 years old. It can be used as a rule in or a rule out to either confirm or allay concerns. And it can also be used as a guide for intervention. And we'll dig more into that as we go through this webinar. What are sociocognitive skills? These skills are really key in early language development. They're the very basic skills that we use when engaging with other people. We use them to infer intentions and meanings behind actions and words. These skills are foundations for understanding communication and language. And the ESB measures 3 sociocognitive skills that are typically developing during very early childhood: social responsiveness, joint attention, and symbolic comprehension. And the longitudinal study that the authors carried out, which I mentioned we'll talk about more later on, showed that these sociocognitive skills, when measured at a very young age, are notably different in children on the autism spectrum. In thinking about how we measure sociocognitive skills, I'm going to describe an experience that I would often have when I was trying to evaluate these skills, which I'm sure many of you are going to be able to relate to. When I was working in a preschool setting, we would often get calls through the child find process or from a daycare or a preschool, and I'd be asked to go observe a student because there were concerns about social skills or potentially questions about a child being on the autism spectrum. And the problem with this approach was that in this natural setting of observing, the chances of seeing some of these sociocognitive skills were really variable. I often had to elicit these behaviors through play or by asking the teacher to set up a scenario between the child and a peer, or by jumping onto the carpet with the child and trying to get them to pretend to play with me. And that didn't always go well or give me the information I needed. And in these instances, I really wish that I had the ESB. Instead of crafting these elaborate situations, I could have used the ESB, which systematically provides prompts to elicit target behaviors. And that's then compared to other children the same age. My colleague Lisa is going to take over for a little bit. She's going to talk a little bit more about administering the subtest in the ESB. Lisa and I were recently talking, and I asked her how many ESBs she had administered, and I think it was over 120. She's too humble to admit it, but she is the ESB expert, so I'm going to pass it along to her.
Thanks, Molly. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to join you today. As Molly mentioned, I was fortunate enough to, be able to administer the ESB many times through the data collection process. And I'm excited to join you today to talk to you about the administration of the ESB. So we'll jump into the first subtest, which is social responsiveness. And this measures, do children show interest in other people? It looks at whether the child looks at or acknowledges the adult's expression of a feeling. And this is a really great first subtest because it sort of acts like a warm-up for the child. There is very little demand placed on them, and all the practitioner is doing is showing a variety of emotions through play and taking note of whether that child can acknowledge the expressed feelings with their eye gaze. And the score that the child will receive is based on the child's nonverbal response. So a look at the practitioner that lasts for at least 2 seconds immediately after the expressed emotion earns them 2 points. If the child just looks briefly or fleetingly at the practitioner immediately after the emotion is expressed, that earns 1 point. And if they do not look at the practitioner, that earns 0 points. The second ESB subtest is joint attention. And this subtest measures whether a child can show a shared interest in an object with an adult. So prior to administering the test, you will set up 6 objects in a horseshoe shape behind the child. Additionally, you will have a carton of plastic eggs with miniature versions of the 6 objects inside, as you can see pictured here on the slide. So in the photo below, you can see that I'm holding the egg with an extended arm, which is a very important piece of this subtest. Then I would shake the egg and pause to notice if the child looks to the egg and back to me. The importance of the extended arm is to allow the child the opportunity and to be able to note if they are switching their eye gaze from the egg to my face. They'll then have another opportunity to show this skill. I will open the egg and show them the little miniature object that's inside, again, holding it far enough away from my face, again, to be able to recognize if they're switching their eye gaze from the object to my face. Next, I would say, I brought my tiger with me today, and I look towards the large corresponding item that's behind the child. The child can receive 2 points if they turn and follow my gaze. If the child does not look, I'll follow up and repeat the statement and prompt with a point. If the child follows this gaze and finger point prompt, they will receive 1 point. And if the child does not follow in either of the conditions, then they receive 0 points for that task. The last of the 3 ESB subtests is symbolic comprehension. Now, this is the most developmentally advanced subtest of the 3. And the skills required for this test are still emerging in some of the very young children you might test. It is comprised of 3 conditions. gesture, miniature, and substitute objects. For this subtest, children are asked to select an object and then take their selected object and place it down a fabric chute. The fabric chute is really engaging and motivating for most children during these tasks. As you can see here in the photo, the examiner performs the gestures with some of the objects, and then the child has to show their understanding of symbol by selecting the correct real object. What was really neat to see in all of the administrations I did was that for younger children, they can sometimes make different associations, like by color or category. And while these are incorrect for the ESB and wouldn't receive points, qualitatively, this information is helpful to understand the child's level of comprehension. And the whole assessment is completed on an easy-to-use record form. What's great about the record form is that there are raw score conversion charts right on each subtest. So that allows you to provide immediate feedback to parents or perhaps other team members or practitioners that the child's working with. And then later, you can convert the scores to standard or in scaled scores using the manual. I'm going to hand it back to Molly now, and she'll talk a little bit more about the standardization of the ESB.
Thanks, Lisa. This might make me a little bit of a school psychology nerd, but whenever I would get a new test, I would always look in the manual to see what norms were used, because that's really critical for knowing how results will translate to the population that you're working with. And the ESB was normed with more than 500 children across the United States. And for those of you in the UK, there are UK norms as well. You can see here on the illustration of the map, the blue shaded states are the ones where children participated in the standardization process. There were also separate clinical groups for those children that were receiving speech language therapy services and for those that were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. A concurrent validity study was conducted with the social responsiveness scale and with the Peabody Picture vocabulary test. And test, retest, and inter-rater reliability tests were also conducted. The ESB was standardized on an equal number of boys and girls, and there were actually no significant differences found between the scores for each group, so combined norms are used. And the data collection team at Hogrefe worked really hard to get a sample that would match the US 2020 census in terms of race and ethnicity. You can see the percentage of the sample in the middle column, and the US 2020 census percentages in the column all the way to the right are fairly close. An analysis of the samples showed no significant effect on ESB performance for race or ethnicity. One of the other frequently occurring challenges that I often came across when practicing was working with children whose primary language was not English, and that ethical dilemma of administering a standardized assessment to them in English and how this might compromise those results. What's great about the ESB is that there is no verbal response required from the child. And looking at the norm sample, children who were multilingual did not have significantly different ESB scores from those who spoke English only. So therefore, as a practitioner, you should feel pretty confident in the results that you receive when administering the assessment to children who are multilingual. At the beginning, I mentioned that we'd be talking about the longitudinal study that the authors had carried out. So this is a little bit more about that. The authors evaluated a sample of children who were referred to clinical services when they were 2 or 3 years old. They gave them the ESB, and 7 to 8 years later, 89% of the children who had scored low on the ESB had either an autism diagnosis or had significant social communication difficulties when measured with the social responsiveness scale. So the ESB has a lot of predictive value. Before we talk about some of the benefits of using the ESB, I'd love to run just another quick poll. I'm wondering if you might answer a question about what your current role or position is, just so we can kind of get an understanding of what people in the audience are doing. looks like got a variety of different roles. So some school psychologists, some speech language pathologists, some administrators. That's great. Some educational psychologists. I know in the UK, a little bit of a different terminology difference there, but I think similar roles as a school psych. Great. Okay,
Great.
so we're going to talk about the benefits of using an assessment like the ESB, and then some of the common challenges that arise when considering an assessment with this age group. So I think Lisa's going to talk a little bit next.
Yes. So the benefits of using the ESB in the early evaluation process. So some of the benefits for the child is that it's a play-based assessment. It's consistent of a kit of toys that come in colorful bags. It only takes 15 minutes. There's no verbal responses needed from the child. So it really does, the authors really designed it in a way to be motivating and eye-catching for the children. And how about for the parents or caregivers, you ask? Well, it's valuable for them as well because they get to observe firsthand how their child responds to each of the prompts on these foundational language skills that otherwise can be hard to observe or can just be taken for granted. And from a practitioner point of view, I would typically do an observation first, before deciding what other assessments or tools to use. So instead of doing an informal observation that, as Molly has already mentioned, might or might not be informative, employing the use of the ESB to guide decision-making process would definitely be my first choice. If the child scores low, that supports the need for referral for further assessment, and in the interim, it allows practitioners to strategically target areas that the child can benefit from receiving support and services in. On the other hand, if none of the child's scores fall in the low category, then the child's sociocognitive strengths can be used to maybe support the development of other areas that are not as strong. And it can also provide reassurance that these pieces are developmentally intact.
Thanks, Lisa. Another thing I know that practitioners are faced with is just the challenge of time. It's one of your most sacred resources. And so conducting evaluations can be really time consuming. The last thing you want to do is spend an hour doing an observation and not see any of the challenges that were potentially raised by parents and teachers in the first place. It might go against our natural intuition, but moving right into this kind of evaluation is a great opportunity to understand those child strengths and challenges up front. And it can help with that decision-making process early on. Like Lisa mentioned, the observation is sort of the common practice to do first, but those observations can take a very long time. They aren't structured or systematic, and it's more of a snapshot of time when things are context dependent. There might not be many instances of a certain behavior, or maybe your presence even changes the child's behavior when you're there. So the ESB instead provides that systematic way to prompt a child for each target behavior and allow you to have that immediate feedback about the child's performance for parents and other teachers.
Other potential feedback we get sometimes is, it's raised cooperation. The child doesn't want to sit, the child won't cooperate. Well, we know that oftentimes when working with this age group, simply getting a child to sit at a table or engage in tasks can prove to be difficult. Children at this age want to engage in play and are self-directed. And this is where the ESB can have some great value. We know that when children don't engage with the ESB, this is informative. Because most children, and I can attest of the over 120 that I did during standardization, most of the children are interested in the ESB because it is play-based, because there's that element of surprise with different toys being taken out of colorful bags. So it really is noteworthy when a child is unable to show interest in the items during the assessment. It's also important to distinguish shy children from disengaged or self-directed children. And through my experience, even shy children who I'd never met before were really likely to demonstrate behaviors because they weren't asked to speak. Additionally, in the longitudinal study, children who did not engage were at high risk of long-term problems, and the majority were later diagnosed.
Thanks, Lisa. So to wrap up, I just want to summarize what the ESB adds to a practitioner's toolbox when it comes to screenings, evaluations, or refining an intervention plan. The ESB is a strong predictor of significant social communication difficulties and autism spectrum disorder. Without this early identification, the opportunities for early intervention are missed. The ESB can be used with children of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds, as there was no significant difference between children who were multilingual and those who only spoke English. And it can also be used with children who are non-speaking or have poor speech intelligibility, since you're not relying on their verbal response. You can administer the ESB with caregivers or other practitioners in the room. And this is a really great way to provide immediate feedback to parents in just under 15 minutes. And lastly, the ESB helps to identify a child's strengths to guide goal setting and intervention planning. So if you do need to refer the child on for further evaluation, this does provide an opportunity for you to see, oh, okay, the child has a strength in this area. Let's use that to support the other areas while you wait for that further evaluation to be conducted.
Before we get to questions, I just wanted to briefly mention a couple of things. You can order the ESB on our website from now until March 31st and use the code ESB 2024 to receive 20% off your purchase in both the US and UK. And with your ESB purchase, you will receive access to our e-learning training program, which covers more in-depth administration and interpretation of the ESB. There are lots of administration videos. You saw some stills of those in our presentation today, but we actually have videos. You'll watch an entire administration, and you'll watch some video clips of working with both typically developing children and clinically referred children. So you can see how our examiners address that. We also have a couple of other products on our website that might be of interest to you. Animal Fun is a gross motor intervention program that can be used with a whole class or a small group to target gross motor skills in an interactive way. This program also supports social skills and can be implemented in an MTSS model. We also publish a variety of books, and here's a sampling of some that we offer, including a book about language disorders, behavior management, and autism spectrum disorder.
And for future projects, we are always looking for professionals to be field examiners with us, both in the US as well as in the UK. As a field examiner, you will primarily recruit and test qualified participants as part of our research for the norming of assessments. As in Hogrefe Publishing Independent Contractor, you receive compensation for each completed test. You choose when and how often to participate in projects after you meet your initial onboarding requirement. You will always be provided training and administration tips and feedback from Hogrefe experts. Additionally, you play a critical role in contributing to the field of research, supporting improved access to mental health and educational services. And you gain early access to up-and-coming assessment tools in the areas of cognition, executive functions, social pragmatics, emotion regulation, and many, many more. If you're interested in becoming a field examiner in the US or in the UK, you can contact us by email shown on the screen.
Thank you, Molly and Lisa. Okay, we can now get to any questions that you have. We had a couple that came in through the chat, and I can address those. First, will we be able to get a recording of today's meeting? Yes, we're going to send out the recording to everyone who registered. We also have some pediatricians on the call today, and we thank you for joining us. In the UK, pediatricians administer tests like the ESB and some of the other ones that we have. It's a little bit of a different process in the US, but we're glad to have you join us learning more about the ESB. Couple of other questions, and Molly and Lisa, I'm going to bounce these to you if you don't mind. The first one, who is a qualified examiner? Who can administer the ESB?
I'm happy to answer that.
Like,
Yeah, I think, we consider the test to be a level B test. So anyone who has really good experience administering tests, so that might be a special education teacher or a pediatrician or a speech language pathologist or a school psychologist, certainly someone who's taken courses in assessment and has that solid experience administering standardized assessments would be qualified.
thanks, Molly. Another question that came in through the chat is, are there any norms available for the UK? Yes, there is a separate UK manual with separate UK norms. So if you are in the UK and you purchase a kit, that from that office, you'll receive that manual instead of the manual for the US. Another question, and Lisa, I'll bounce this one to you. Can this assessment be given to a group or only one-to-one?
Great question. Yes, this assessment is for one-to-one assessing. So you can only do one child at a time.
Okay, here's another one, Lisa. I will address this one to you. Do you have to sit at a table to administer the test?
That's a great question. The answer is no, you do not have to sit at a table. While it is recommended, the table does provide sort of like a focus and even a little boundary from the bags. We know sometimes kids can get a little bit grabby and, they can be really motivated and wanting to touch everything. But no, it does not have to be done at a table. You may do it on the floor as well.
And we saw some of the items incorporate a chute where the child puts an item down the chute after they select it. What if that is a distraction, Lisa? What would you recommend doing then?
Yes, that's another great question. It's actually addressed in the manual as well by the authors that while the chute is generally motivating for most children, it can be removed if it becomes a distraction. And during standardization, a handful of times that was the case. And so yes, you may remove it if it becomes a distraction for the child you're working with.
Here is another question, Molly. I will direct this one to you. Has there been any consideration for virtual administration?
Yeah, this was a question that came up at NASP as well. I understand people are in situations where virtual administration is really necessary because there's such a shortage of providers. I think this assessment does require such technical, I guess, awareness of the child's eye gaze that I do wonder if it would be difficult to conduct that virtually, especially because it happens in such a fleeting moment. So, standardization was all done in person. So we do recommend that it's done in person. I guess there could be situations where you might need to get really creative, but at the very least, needing to have someone on the other end who's experienced and able to, let you know how that child's responding. But I think generally in person is the recommended practice.
Great. Thank you, Molly and Lisa. If anyone has a question, now would be the time to type it in. We don't have any that are open, so we'll leave this open for another minute or so. If you have any other questions, we're happy to answer them here. And if you don't have any questions now, but if you think of that later, we'll talk about our contact information in just a moment. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming through, so I'm just going to wrap up here. We've really enjoyed being with everyone today. We had a great time at NASP where we're able to speak with many of you and hear about what kinds of things you're looking for to support your work with children. After you've had some time with the ESB, we'd love to have a webinar in a few months that'll focus more on administration and interpretation with feedback from you live. Hopefully we get some people who want to participate in that. Keep an eye out for more information to come on our website or via email or our newsletter or on our social media sites. We're Hogrefe. We know it's a hard name to say, but we hope you don't forget it. We'll be here to continue to develop assessment tools that support you and the children you work with. Thank you for coming today. And we got one question here at the end. Molly, I'm going to bounce this one to you. Can you use this in the regular education setting?
It's a great question. We've talked a lot about the different possible times that you could use this evaluation. So if you think about the evaluation process, it might fit in a variety of places. So for example, if you're trying to decide if you need to move forward with a referral to special education, this could be used in that regular education world to help inform that decision, right? So maybe you're not sure, there's not enough evidence, it's sort of just parental concerns or maybe teacher concerns. You could certainly do this as a first step to help you make that decision. Or if you're sort of already there and you've made the decision to do the referral, this could be used as a part of a battery of assessments to help understand whether or not the child has significant social communication difficulties. So yes, I could see it being used outside of that special education realm.
Thanks, Molly. Again, our contact information is up on the screen. If you need to reach out to us for more questions, and don't forget code ESB 2024 for 20% off through the end of March. Thank you.